Ladies and gentlemen, welcome once again to another edition of the Archives Book Club. I am joined, of course, by my good friend Adraseth, as well as the Goblin King himself, Apoptosis. Bow before your king, mere mortals.
What is going on? Great to be here. Thanks so much for inviting me to talk about some excellent literature. A
Indeed.
lot of people don't know goblins quite fanciful in the ways of learning and book reading. So I'm glad I could share some knowledge with you guys.
We're glad to have you, man.
Yeah, welcome back, everybody. Today we got a special book and suggested by Apoptosis, and that is a book probably everybody who's played some sort of RTS in their lives has heard this book before, or if you're a Neuro fan, you definitely have heard this book before. This is Sun Tzu's The Art of War. And Sun Tzu was a military general, lived around 500 BC, and these are some little knowledge bombs that he dropped a long time ago, and they still apply today. And so we're going to go over this book and kind of check out all the different chapters. It's very concise, and so it's almost like a poetic reading of the knowledge that he had as a general.
Yeah. This is definitely a different sort of book than, what we've done historically for the archives, but I actually really kind of like that. I think it's really sort of interesting to dive into a text like this, both like because the presentation is different, being sort of an ancient text, and also the angle that it applies to RTS is a little bit different. We've done a lot of stuff that is more managing your learning or managing your emotions as a competitor, but not the actual tactical strategic, here's how you do the stuff, right? So this in a way almost applies to something that we really haven't addressed as a book club, which I think is really kind of refreshing and fun.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I don't know how you guys actually read this book, but for me, the first time I read it, it was actually like I didn't want to just sit there and like, okay, next page, next
Mm.
page, next page. It was like I would read a bit of it because it's so condensed, like you guys were saying. And then
Hmm.
I would stop. Like, yeah, I could read more. And normally when I read books, I'll keep flipping through until I have to go to
Hmm.
sleep or whatever it is I'm doing. But this one, it's like each kind of like section that he does is so condensed with like this possibly perfect amount of information if you just think about it a little bit longer after that.
Hmm.
So it's almost better, I think, if you take it and you just read a little bit of it and you actually force yourself to stop reading and then just kind of marinate on that a little bit, think about it for a little bit longer until you move on to like that next section. Otherwise, I mean, you could obviously read it however you want to, but if you do it that way, you can kind of dwell on all of his sayings he's doing a bit more,
Hmm.
and that you get a lot more out of this book because this book is like you literally could just turn to a random page, put your finger on a line, and you're like, oh yeah, that's so key for like
Hmm.
not only maybe just life in general, but like StarCraft, especially. Obviously, we're very StarCraft focused people. So I love it. It's a great book to just like pick up. You put it on the coffee table, someone picks up, and they're like, suddenly they're inspired to change their life in some, some
Yeah.
manner.
Yeah, totally. I liked in the notes, like you use the term dense to describe the book, right? And I think
Mhm.
that that's like exactly how I would say it, right? It's and I think this is the way with a lot of ancient texts, whether it's like philosophy or some ancient spiritual text or whatever. Like Adraseth, you mentioned kind of poetry too, right? These are all things where it's like it's dense and you need to sit with it and like unpack it, right? Like go, okay, you said that and it took you like 7 words and you gave me this whole concept. There's like an economy to it. As I was thinking about that, it almost made me wonder, like, is it because it used to be harder to reproduce a text than it is today, right? So you were incentivized to make it a little punchier than today, where it's like, yeah, okay, copy pasta that, print it again on a press and keep it moving. You really kind of had to like be economical if you're trying to get your idea into some other brain.
Hmm. That's an interesting point. I hadn't thought about the logistical problems of 2,500 years of
Hmm.
time, give or take, to actually reproduce something that somebody had written down rather than just the verbal transfer of knowledge. And yeah, this is if you do read the book, which is quite short, actually. It's the version
Yeah.
I read, and there's a bunch of different translations and versions available. Mine was about 35 pages. So if you do read the book, it doesn't take very long. And I think Apoptosis is right. You almost want to read it and just digest parts of it,
Hmm.
maybe one chapter or a few lines at a time. A little bit like the book that we read with Fear Dragon, Mind Gym, where
Yeah.
if you read that book cover to cover, it's almost too much information. You kind of want to pick little parts of it, take some time, understand it, think about it, contemplate it, maybe even come back to it, and then apply those principles. And I think that when I was reading it, the thing that came back to me time and time again is that when we apply this to our favorite RTS game, StarCraft, it's really about in StarCraft thinking of yourself as a commander. You're in control of not just an economy, but an army and building and all the things that need to happen in StarCraft really make you not just like a soldier in the army, but the commander of the entire situation and making those distinctions between decision making and spending money and so forth. It comes into play in all aspects of this book because Sun Tzu was a general and he was in the top level of commanding an army.
Yeah. Very cool. The only other thing that I would say, kind of on this meta level, where it's like, how should you read this book? How should you think about these concepts? Is holy crap, man. Anytime Sun Tzu drops a bullet point list for you, holy shit, pay attention, dude. Because, like, and it's like every single one, when I was making the notes, I was like, okay, let me just go find all the bullet point lists. Because that was, I did audiobook for this one, which I think was a bad choice, actually. Um,
Mm.
so I had to go back and do a lot of backfilling when I made my notes. I'm like, okay, let me just find every single bullet point list because those were the ones where I was like screaming in my car, like, oh yeah, like I got to write this down. I need a timestamp. So I think those are very sort of rich. So I guess just diving in, like I think the format for this is almost going to be a little bit different than some other shows where it's more like, okay, here's a saucy one liner that Sun Tzu said, and then we're going to talk about it for like 30 minutes to try to unpack, right? So the first of those that really jumped out at me was this concept that victory means making fewer mistakes than your opponent, and it's like, I don't know, a lot of these I say it and it's like, well, yeah, duh, right? Like of course that would be true, but as like a mental framework, I think that's really interesting, right? So if I go into the game and the idea is not I'm going to hit this timing and kill the other person, it's like I'm going to maneuver my way through the situations that you and I get into as we fight each other better than you. I'm going to make fewer mistakes and I'm going to make decisions quicker and with a better outcome, right? Like that's a nice framework for StarCraft at a very high level.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I really did like that quote quite a bit actually, because one thing I see a lot, and I'm sure you guys have seen it too, and I'm sure we do this all the time as well. And it's a really interesting way to think about the game. In this sort of frame of making fewer mistakes than your opponent, that can go down to the smallest level, right? That means not floating 75 minerals and then making your drone at the beginning of the game, right?
Hmm.
You do that and you can think of it in a way of like, I'm behind. My opponent is actually ahead of me right now because
Hmm.
he made that drone 25 minerals faster, or he maybe right, we can just assume that they did, right? So
Hmm.
that sort of really speaks to like why it's so important to hit those builds like as crisp and perfect as possible. Don't float 10 more Vespine gas than you need to make this upgrade. No, make it right when you can, because there's no advantage in waiting longer. You know, like that's these builds are strong because you're doing it as fast as physically possible in the game while staying safe or whatever it is that your build is. But
Hmm.
people,
Hmm.
I think I've seen that a lot, and certainly when I was learning the game, and still learning the game, of course, is like there's like a lackadaisical like, I'll get the drone out, it'll be about this time, and and,
Yep.
and like I put the pool down, but it was a little bit late, and it's like I'll hammer people on that. It's like, no, dude, like you have nothing else going on right now. You have got to just put this down right on, like right as soon as you can. And they have these huge trickle down effects because
Hmm.
your spawning pool is 5 seconds late, right? That means that your lings now will be 5 seconds later. That means that first reaper is going to come in and have 5 seconds that he wouldn't have had before, where he's not gonna, be at least attacked or defended or something. So that could shift the whole game. You never know. And that causes more mistakes to just compound on top of each other. So
Yep.
that one line that you wrote there, that was something I saw as well. And that one is just like so huge. You could apply that to not only StarCraft, but I mean just almost any other competitive game that I can think of, really.
Yeah, I love the example of the Reaper, right? Because my gosh, like 5 seconds of a
Mhm.
Reaper shooting at my stuff feels real bad compared to 5 seconds making a pool late. It's like, yeah, okay, I don't
Yeah.
emotionally feel anything that bad if I make a
Mhm.
building late, but oh boy, you let a Reaper shoot at you for 5 seconds feels like an eternity.
It doesn't have any intrinsic negative properties to making a pool 5 seconds later. At that moment, it's
Mm-hmm.
like at that moment, you don't, you put the pool down 5 seconds later. Yeah, your build seems a little bit messed up, but it's like, what's the big deal? But like,
Mm-hmm.
no, we put the pool down at that time because of this specific reason. Because at this moment in the game, we need to have those things ready perfectly, like ready to go. And it's
Mm-hmm.
it's it's timed out. I mean, it is so perfect because depending on the map too, like the shortest rush distance map, just to speak for right now, anyways, I think is submarine. You literally the lings will come out and be like, "Okay, I'm at the natural," and the Reaper will show up, and it's
Yeah,
like
wow.
these people know way more than I do, and so
Mm-hmm.
just put the pool down when you're putting the pool down, or something like that.
Right.
Everything I'll say will be Zerg centric, by the way, because I have no idea how it applies to any other race, but like I can see it through the lens of the swarm, and it makes so much sense to me.
Mm-hmm. That's good. We've actually, if we count Adraseth for his Terran half here, we got equal representation today.
Oh, right on. Right on.
I think the idea that mistakes will add up over the game is really important, and you're right that that applies to a lot of games, not just StarCraft. You see that oftentimes in chess, at high levels of chess. The person that wins sometimes is the person that just made fewer mistakes, not actually outsmarting their opponent. That they actually played themselves in a way. And you can look at a lot of competitive games like Counter Strike, which I often bring up on the podcast about, you know, in how Counter Strike relates to some of the books we talk about. But making the correct decision on your position and what to buy in a certain round is very important. And making a mistake there can give your opponent a huge advantage. One of the things that comes to mind directly for a Counter Strike analogy is economy is so important in that game, where if the opponent has less economy than you in terms of either they haven't spent their money or they have an inferior weapon, and you make a mistake and die and give up your weapon, well, you've shifted the power balance so strongly in the opponent's favor. And when we think about StarCraft, like the Reaper analogy in the early game, it's so interesting because for a Protoss player, or let's say you're playing in Terran and you're playing a TBT, losing one or two workers in the first couple minutes of the game is such a huge amount. And it's really interesting, when you see that, okay, well, I'm only down two workers, especially in a mirror matchup in StarCraft, but that can be a game changer for a lot of reasons. And when reading this book, the kind of bullet pointed section that came to mind for me was this 5 essentials of victory. And I think it kind of ties in with, don't make mistakes and what do you need to do to actually achieve victory. So I'll just read this kind of abbreviated quote that I made here. The 5 essential of victories is he knows when to fight and when not to fight. He knows how to handle both superior and inferior forces, and he's prepared himself and waits to take the enemy unprepared. And those are some basic things that we all know as RTS players,
Mm-hmm.
but it's so important to keep in mind that those are the things that need to be happening or being evaluated at all times throughout the game, right? If you do one of those things at the wrong time and make a blunder, well, your opponent now has the tempo advantage, and you better watch out. You could quite possibly just lose the whole game there.
Yep. Yeah, I love particularly that final point in your list. This is one that I learned actually doing back when I was playing MMOs a lot. I was always into like the more PvP. Boy, now there's a trap in a StarCraft stream. The more player versus player focused, battling against other human players in an open world setting. And oh man, like there is no greater advantage than knowing that you're about to be in a fight when the other group or the other person does not, right? The
Hmm.
getting the jump on somebody in an MMO like that. Oh, like I took that lesson so strongly to heart from the days when I was playing MMOs that like it has actually colored my entire style in StarCraft where I actively look for the ability to, no matter what supply you're hitting at, whether it's an all in, a timing, whether it's a max out, right? I
Mhm.
always look to set up that I know where your army is. I know that we're about to fight. You don't know that we're about to fight, and I'm going to get the jump on you, and you're going to have the oh shit surge of adrenaline to go, I got it, where's my, where are my control groups? Because I hate that feeling. And maybe it's because my sort of emotional range is pretty wide, right? And there are probably people who are a cooler cucumber than me who can react to that and be a little more smooth with it. But I know that there are other people out there on the ladder that are like me that kind of get frantic. And so I look to induce that in the opponent.
Yeah, I mean, definitely, I would say, um, especially with more complicated army compositions, just suddenly being attacked
Mm-hmm.
from a position that you're not expecting or from a a side of the map that you're not ready for is just the worst because I'm sure we can all relate to this. Not all of your units are the same speed. Even you need to, a lot of these, especially late game compositions. My like go to thought process for like what is one of the hardest army compositions I can think of, and it would be like Corruptor Viper with like lurkers or something like that. You
Mm-hmm.
need to have like okay, these guys are set up here. These guys are going to swoop in from this side. Pull. You got to just like all these moving parts. So if you are the aggressor and you take them by surprise, that's like a slam dunk fight most of the time.
Mm-hmm.
Simply because I mean maybe they had an adequate army to defend, but that element of surprise is super huge. And
Mhm.
I would actually say that like, in turn goes to that first line that Adris had said, knows when to take a fight and when not to.
Yeah.
That is like a perfect point. I mean, that's what really keys in for me as well, because like knowing when to take a fight. Obviously, if it's like, okay, well, I just killed all of the overlords or whatever. I cleared creep on this side of the map. I feel like Terrans are super good at this too, actually.
Mm-hmm.
They're like, okay, where is the least amount of creep that's on the map? Okay, I'm gonna go that way. And that
Mm-hmm.
is like, God, like, why can't they just step on this like perfect pathway I have over here? Because I'm much better over there. But I didn't re-put my creep down over there, and so now that's where they're gonna attack from. It's like something drilled into Terran's head, and it's super annoying. But that's like the perfect way to set that up, and that's the way that Terran wants to fight 100% if they're gonna take some big engagement. But that first line knows when to fight and when not to fight. That also keys in a lot for me because I mean 99% of the time, like when you're learning the game and you're getting used to like even just understanding what fights you can win is
Mm.
very hard.
Yep.
Like that is you see that like at top levels, right? One way in particular that I thought that this guy has an incredible sense for like I'm gonna win this fight, I'm gonna win this fight, I'm gonna lose this fight, and he'll retreat those units was Cyril. Cyril actually would do really crazy burrowed roach plays,
Mm.
right? Where he'd split his army up into like 4 or 5 different groups and he would go and attack different locations. Now his opponent, I can't remember who was playing in this specific game I have in mind, but his opponent is no he's no weakling either. So he can defend those things. But the thing that I thought was just amazing, and I'm like, dude, I have no idea how this guy did it, is he would go between all of those groups and instantly just be able to analyze, like, I'm good here. I'm going to keep fighting. I'm good here. I'm going to keep fighting. Here, I'm going to lose. I'm going to leave. He would burrow and he would leave them, or he'd, like, walk them away somewhere and he'd be able to manage all these different fights that are happening at the same time and understand instantly I'm fine or I need to retreat. And that is like just bananas to me because that is so hard even if it's just one blob versus another blob. Sometimes it's like, well, I think I'm gonna win, so I'll try to, you try to make something happen, but then it comes back, and maybe you lose that fight, and you go in the replay, and you're like, oh yeah, no, there's no way I would have won that. Why did I
Mm-hmm.
think that in the time? Even that skill right there, to me, is just like if you could just know every fight that you're about to engage in, if you were gonna win or lose that, you would, oh my god, you would just crush.
Yeah.
You would just crush.
Yeah, it's a very difficult skill to build up, right? where, in the moment is incredibly hard, of course, but
Hmm.
sometimes even in the replay, I'll look at it and I'll be like, yeah, I don't know. Like I've actually often thought that it would be a fun, like StarCraft themed party game that you just take a couple of like random blobs of units and you put it on a screen, right? And then go, what
Oh yeah,
wins, right? Or like, okay, now the zealots have charge, what wins, right? And
yeah.
kind of do that and vote. Oh
Who
man, that would,
knows, man?
yeah, it's so
Like
tough.
that's so that would be I would be the worst at that game because that just sounds so hard. Like unless it's like the one exception to this, I feel, at least for Zerg, again, is like the mirror matchup. ZVZ. I think the mirror matchup, you have the highest understanding of I'm gonna win this or I'm gonna lose this.
Hmm.
And a lot of that comes from just having a knowledge of A, how much your opponent has before you start the fight, right? And then B, another big thing, which is upgrades, right? Clicking on
Mm.
them, seeing am I ahead in upgrades? If we're playing the same units, which ZVZ is pretty much always Roach versus Roach if you get to that point. Then it's like, okay, if I'm ahead in upgrades, maybe I can have a little less and I can still win. Or if I'm behind and I have less, then there's no way. And that actually goes to I think we were just talking about something about similar to that. Making no, I think it's later on actually.
Yeah.
Knowing how to Oh no, I'm sorry. It's the second line here. Knows how to handle both superior and inferior forces.
Hmm.
So it's like, okay, well, my guys don't have as many upgrades. I don't have as many. In that situation, you want to buy time, right? So you need to like harass on the other side of the map or something.
Mhm.
There's
Hmm.
so much here. Like literally, I feel like this just like there's 3 lines. This man is just a wizard. I
Yep.
don't know. He
Absolutely.
he was in tune with it, dude. He knew.
Hmm. I mean, there's a reason that we're still reading this, this many years later, right?
Hmm.
So you had
Absolutely.
a pretty cool quote here, Apop. Do you want to read it or should I?
I can read it, or if you want to, I don't
No,
know.
have at
I
it, man.
can share, bud. All right. So this was a quote I did find later on, and I cannot remember exactly what chapter, because I wasn't as strict to the chapters as you guys were. I think I floated around a little bit, but
Oh,
he said,
we're all over the place too. Don't worry.
"Okay, great." He said, "Hence, the skillful fighter puts himself into a position which makes defeat impossible and does not miss the moment for defeating the enemy." And that is, to me, incredibly difficult, especially
Mhm.
in like a StarCraft game or any kind of competitive game. Again, it goes, I will see this pretty much all through StarCraft because that's a competitive game that I only play.
Hmm.
But to me, this spoke volumes of understanding when to kind of going back even a little bit, when to fight, when not to fight, and how to stay safe.
Mm.
One big thing, again, I know Neuro is huge on this book, and he's also huge on poker, and he actually combined the two a little bit in this way. And he said this was essentially playing solid,
Hmm.
playing a way that was not really exploitable by your opponent. You're not really taking crazy high risks, but maybe you just win if they don't do this one specific thing. You're playing in a way that it's not very easy to just walk in, from this one location that you didn't see and roll over everything that you have. Um, and to me, at least, and you guys have some great notes for this too, but that meant like for like in the lens of the way that I play, I always feel comfortable when my army is like at home, right? If you're safe, you're back in your bases, you're kind of chilling, you can easily go back and forth and defend. And there's a little dance that goes with that. But for me, I saw this like, okay, when I leave an attack, how do you not lose the game to like 2 drops or something like that? Or
Hmm.
like a warp in of zealots on the right side of the map that is just going to take out as many things as possible. So I was like,
Hmm.
okay, I'm terrible at putting down static defense at my outer bases. I think Sun Tzu would be very sad about that for me. And he would probably go, well, if you leave, you're going to lose like those 3 bases and you'll lose the game. You better win right now or you'll just straight up lose. Um, or leaving defensive units at home. Or I even thought for Terran, like I see Terrans do this a lot too, and it's super annoying where I want them to rally across the map because then I know that there's nothing at home. But then, like those really good Terrans, they'll just like rally to their most exposed
Mm.
bases or locations, and then they'll manually go back, grab those guys when they want them to go across and move. And so Like, yeah, I don't know. There's still so much in this, but what did you guys think on that one?
Yeah, this one's spicy. I read it and I thought, ah, now here's something where everyone, no matter how aggressive or defensive a player they are, is going to go, you see, I'm right. I knew
Yeah.
all along. And,
Yep.
and I could feel myself doing that a little bit. And I think it's interesting, right? Because he's kind of, it's almost like those of us who are more macro defensively minded got half of the Sun Tzu lesson, and those of us who are like, I want to hit a sharp timing, or I want to all in somebody, and I want to be on the front foot, got the other half of the Sun Tzu lesson. And we're all arguing about it, and like he's rolling around in his grave like, you idiots, like it's both. I think like almost maybe you could, no matter what your style is, you can still apply the entire like advice holistically. So what I mean by that is so I'm a kind of a timing focused guy. I really like being aggressive.
Yeah.
And I can still think about, how do I not lose along the lines of, all right, I want to hit this timing, but this timing is not, I'm not proxying 4 gates and hoping for the best, right? Which means that I have ceded a little bit of initiative to my opponent because I feel
Mhm.
like I want to flex some macro muscle, because that's actually where I started, was the pure macro defensive. I want to flex a little macro muscle and then drop the hammer on you, right? Which means I need to learn the encyclopedia of weird bullshit you could do to me in the first 5 minutes of the game, right? So that's my how do I not lose? What scouts do I need to hit? If I see this, what does that mean? How do I need to build around it? How do I prevent the losses, right? Sometimes that means I got to really press myself to get the scout in there, even though, back to, your spawning pool thing, it's like the tech needs to go down at the right time. You have 100 gas, not 110 gas, not 120 gas. But at the same time, if you don't send that scout through, oh, there's a low drone count. Hold on to your hats, folks. Opponent doesn't have enough drones. Get ready.
Right.
So, you can think about it a lot like that. On the flip side, the for the defensively minded folks, not missing the opportunity to seize victory, right? So, maybe you've now just defended my cute little timing attack, right? Haha, I have units. Surprise, right? If you miss the opportunity to go, oh, you just threw away everything you had. The only thing that's back home is like one poor immortal that just rallied out, and I still have an army. I'm just going to end you right now, right?
Mhm.
What you've kind of done is handed the opponent an opportunity to get back in it. Maybe I'm getting DT tech and I'm going to be a pain in the ass for the rest of the game, right? So I think this is one where it's almost like whatever conclusion you jump to and you're like, see, he's saying I'm right. You almost have to go back the other way a little bit.
Yeah, there's this idea in StarCraft, especially, that there's no right answer, and the game is a little bit of rock, paper, scissors. And there's no right way to play, there's no wrong way to play. And coming back to what Apoptosis was saying, especially about pushing out across the map and having static defense at home, part of the game sometimes is just knowing what will kill you, right? Like knowing, I'm in this certain position. What actually could happen to make me lose the game? Do I have defense against invisible units, for example? If I'm ahead and the only vulnerability I have is invisible units, well, that's something we have to deal with. And it's hard to do that in the moment of the game, remembering, oh yeah, right, okay, put some static defense down. Or similarly, creep spread. My vulnerable side is the one without enough creep. And then when you talk about timing attacks, getting the timing attack down at the right time and actually hitting at the right time. And it's so often that as players, we do this where we do our timing attack, it doesn't work, and we think, well, that build's crap. But the reality is that we didn't execute properly, right? So we are our own worst enemy in that case. And I think it's really interesting because in those two examples you guys brought up, you're talking about being more of an active player. And there's this section that actually struck out at me as the turtling player. And as a
Mhm.
Terran, I often play mech because I'm not nearly as good playing bio. It's very hard to play bio. So I will play mech. And that means I'm going to turtle to 4 bases and then get a million Thors and walk across, trundle across the map and go kill you. And what's interesting about it is the games that often I win when I play mech is when the opponent just throws himself against me time and time and time again. And Sun Tzu has this several points about this of besieging a country, prolonged warfare, right? That if you're trying to siege a fortified position, it's not likely to go in your favor,
Right.
right? And likewise, if you are the active player, you don't necessarily want to run into somebody's static D again and again and again. Think, well, I'll just kill him this time. And we see this even all the way into the highest levels of the game at the GSL, where somebody, often Zerg players, because they have more of an active army, are running banelings into planetary fortresses again and again and again. And what they're doing is they are gaining ground, but they're also using up gas to do that.
Mhm.
And so in the long span of the game, the Terran's just waiting them out, and then pretty soon they have no resources to fight that war anymore. And so it's an interesting dichotomy depending on your play style. These are all things that you can think about. There's no right answer and there's no wrong answer. It just depends on you and what you want to do. And another thing that stuck out to me in that same section was stealing from the enemy, right? So if you're fighting this fight that you don't seem to be winning, what about stealing one of their bases, right? And we see this sometimes if you're a cheeky player and you kind of take a hidden base, or Zerg players will do this where they just try and mine out a little bit on the opponent's side just to get that advantage,
Mm.
or Terrans will drop mules. I saw a game recently in the TSL 6 that was some mule drops on the opponent's base on the other side of the map, which was really interesting. And they didn't care about the mules getting home. They cared about taking the minerals away from the
Right.
other player. And those are all things to think about when you play in your play style. As you read this kind of book, apply it to your style. It's completely open-ended.
Yeah, very cool. It's funny. You mentioned kind of the prolonged siege thing. I can't remember if it was in my Twitch chat or if somebody mentioned this in Discord, but when I said we were going to do this book, somebody, faked a Sun Tzu quote, said, "No, seriously, like, don't fight uphill into siege tanks. Really, don't fight siege tanks, Sun Tzu," right? And it's so funny, right? Because it's the epitome of, his sternest advice is like, no, God, for real, don't do it ever. It's so bad. All right, so jumping topics a little bit, he has again another list. I love his lists, man. About different kind of skill sets that you need to be able to command an army. And so this one goes judging distance, estimating quantity, calculation, balancing chance, and victory. And I read this one. This one frustrated me. I really kind of had to wrestle with this a little bit because I'm like, dang, man, those last three feel like the same thing. Like calculation, balancing chance, and victory. Like what, especially as he describes victory, it's like the victory bullet point is like, and then figure out who wins. It's like, well, didn't we do that in calculation? Like, what? Right. And I had this intuitive feeling, the feeling when somebody's trying to teach you something and you're like, yeah, come on, why are you belaboring the point? And they're like, no, like, you're not listening. You need to see the nuance here that I see. And you're like, I get it. Let's move on. I kind of was feeling that tension with Sun Tzu as an instructor here, where it's like, all right, I'm going to not blow off the bullet point list here, right? Like, I'm very tempted to do it, right? And so I guess just breaking these down, right? And giving them each the time that they need to breathe. So I think about judging distance, like, maybe I'm trying to set up some kind of multi-prong attack. And I want for the zealots on the eastern edge of the map to arrive at the same time as my main army. I need to have a very strong sense for how long are they going to take to get from where I warped them in over there. Or maybe I'm flying a prism in. I'm gonna warp in somebody's base because Protoss is bullshit, right? And I want the main army to punch them, at some.
Somebody clip it. We heard it here first, baby.
I'm a condemned man now. And any of these things, or another situation, right? I'm halfway across the map. I missed my opponent's army because I don't have good, eyes on them right now. And now they're attacking me. Do I go forward or do I go back? And sometimes that calculation can be really, really rough, right? It's like, well, which is actually quicker? Do I need to recall? Am I okay to, if I'm 2/3 of the way across the map, that calculus is a little bit different. Mm-hmm. Then there's estimating quantity, right? Let's talk again about that drone count, that adept shade. While you're trying to get your tech down, look at that drone count and figure out if you need to have alarm bells ringing or not, right? You need to be able to look with her crappy little blinders on that she has now, right? You need to be able to use that tiny adept vision and go, that's 9 drones. and then draw a conclusion about it, right? And if you can't do that, you're at risk, right? You can get knocked over by, so if you think that those 5 drones or 9 drones, oh boy, you are going to lose some ladder games, right? So that one feels straightforward to me. We also kind of talked about judging armies, and that's sort of there too. It's like how many lings is that, give or take? Um,
Hmm.
and this feeds nicely into the point of calculation. Okay, now that I know that it's such and such amount of lings and this many roaches and that many hydras, and I know what I have, does what I have beat that, right? Like, so I thought of the calculation point as what happens if these things fight, right? And then balancing chance is like what outcomes are likely based on that last thing. So okay, the what happens is opponent will have 3 hydras left and I will have nothing, right? Balancing chance is like, okay, how likely is it your opponent's going to control perfectly? How likely is it you're going to control perfectly? Maybe I still want this fight if I know I warped some stuff into your main. You're panicked about that, and I'm about to micro a prism like crazy. And these immortals are going to get a little extra value against your roaches or whatever it is, right? And then victory is kind of like, okay, given all of that, now draw your conclusion about if I do this, do my odds of winning the game increase, right? Like, what is the actual outcome that I care about? So you have to kind of like weave it all back together. I do not feel confident about my interpretation here. So I would be very open to, like, were you guys as frustrated by this bullet point list as me, or did it make more sense to you?
Well, I would say this is one of the things that I really like about this book in particular is there's so many different ways to interpret the same set of
Yeah.
information depending on the way that you're looking at it, right? So some of these, yes, I did see it in the pretty much the exact same way you did. Judging distance again as a Zerg player, for me, what that meant was there's this so like 2 base roach all in. So really bread and butter. You make a wall, you make the upgrades, you go and you attack, right? Well, there is this really interesting thing you'll see in really good roach all-ins and really bad roach all-ins. Really bad roach all-ins, they'll wait for their upgrades to be done and then they'll walk across the map. Really good roach all-ins, they'll already be on that side of the map as soon as their upgrades hit, and they'll be able to take that fight. Where you want to be when you get roach speed and maybe your +1 missile attack is like seconds away from fighting your opponent. You don't want to be like, okay, we're done, let's go. Because again, that timing is so crucial. It's really good because if you can hit that timing really well, you'll catch them in an upgrade disadvantage or with an amount of forces that even if they're ready for it, might still be hard to deal with. But you need to be able to judge that distance properly. Okay, how long is it? When do I need like how roughly how far in this upgrade meter do I need to start moving across the map? And it's oftentimes much sooner than you think it is because it takes your units, depending on the map, quite a long time to get there. So that's the way that I saw judging distance, but I think that's really similar to the way that you saw it. How long,
Mm.
when I warp in here, how long is it going to take zealots to get there, and then when do I want to be attacking? Because you don't want your like run by attack to be the first thing that hits. Normally, you
Hmm.
want that to be masked underneath the alerts of like a giant army at their third base or something, right?
Right. Yeah.
Um, Estimating quantity, I think for me anyways, I think you nailed that as far as like for us, it's less I'd say worker count, and it's like, okay, how many barracks do they have? How
Mm.
many gateways do you have? How like are you trying to be aggressive or are you trying to take a third or a fourth?
Hmm.
What are you doing? And that for Zerg players anyways is like, okay, what do I need to do in response to that? Oh, they have like 9 gates. They just started it. I guess I need to make units because if not, I'm gonna die to like 18 zealots in about a minute from now or something like
Right.
that.
Yeah.
So that's where we of course care about worker count too, but for like our big indicator is how many buildings do you have? Of what type are they? Um, Calculation. Now that is a now that I mean, is there a more general thing you could say than just, oh yeah, calculate how this
Right.
is gonna work, right? Like, yeah, that could apply to so many things, even in build development.
Hmm.
Like if you're trying to like, okay, I want to make a build. Have you ever tried to make a build, by the way? Have you
Once.
ever tried to like, I want to make a build? That's not possible. People don't make builds.
Yeah.
AIs make builds. I'm
Right.
positive of it. Someone like it's just not gonna happen, dude. Like every build somebody plays is just based off of like some archaic and ancient first build that somebody made, and we
Right.
just modified it a little bit. But I see it that way, right? Calculation. If you look at like how are these builds set up, how are they supposed to be done? It's meticulously and it's perfectly calculated most of the time to you got 100 gas, you get this upgrade.
Mhm.
You got 100 gas, you get this upgrade. You have this many drones, you get a third base or whatever it is, right? Like it's nailed perfect. So you have like as close to the perfect amount of resource that you need to make that without wasting any and without
Mhm.
like just losing. Um, so that's always been interesting to me. And balancing chance, I think that's the one that I saw the most differently from you in victory. Those are the two
Mm.
that I saw very differently.
Yeah.
Balancing chance to me, that what to and from the way that I saw it was how confident do I feel that I know exactly what they have? Because StarCraft
Ah.
2 is not a game of perfect information. You can scout, you have ways to gain information. How confident do I feel that there's not a proxy dark shrine on the like random corner of the map somewhere? How
Yeah.
confident do I feel that everything that he has I know? Or I know exactly what his army composition is and I know roughly where it's at, right? Every race has a different way to do this, but that's what I saw as balancing chance. Okay, if I attack now, am I going to be surprised because he suddenly has 5 void rays that I didn't know about, or do I really know what this guy has and I know exactly what I need to do?
Mhm.
Um, and then victory is kind of a really interesting thing actually to me. And I've talked to people about this before, like, well, what do I do? Um, how do you actually win the game? Right? How do you, like
Mm.
your opponent might be doing something that you've not accounted for, or is doing something you think is like silly, right? One thing in particular, I see people a lot of the time they're like, what do I do here? Like, how do I win? Is like two base Terran. It's not good. It's awful. It's not very solid, right? But have you ever tried to kill a 2 base Terran? You ever tried to kill a Terran that has 4 siege tanks that you can't hit and 2 on the
Right.
high ground? You know what army kills that? Broodlords.
Yeah.
Broodlords will kill that. So that's why I tell him, I said, man, don't be in a rush. Like just yeah, it might be 5 minutes in the game and he's on 2 base and he's just sitting there. But tell me what army will beat that, right? No, just be willing to be patient
Mm.
and if they don't want to attack, fine, you can, I mean, you've quote unquote won the game, you're not going to lose, right? But then feel free to get to that super late game army that you know will crush this. Stop trying to bash your head in
Mhm.
because you feel like, oh, they're on 2 base, I'm on 4 bases, I can just make lings and banes. It's like, no, you can't, dude. You're gonna you will literally give them this game if you just keep doing that. You will
Mhm.
mine out eventually. And I think people are quick to be frustrated by that style of play because they feel like, oh, this is unfair. How can they do this? Or whatever it is, right? Like everyone has their own kind of mental gymnastics they go through. But I always say, just relax, man. Like if they're doing something bad and you know that it's bad and you know that there's no chance that they can kill you, just just get the army that you know will just absolutely crush this guy. 2 broodlords and that guy's dead, or whatever it
Mhm.
is, right? Maybe they're going straight like all phoenixes or whatever, right? But it applies in those situations. So victory to me represented what is the actual path that I can secure victory like 100% of the time off of what this game is. And the longer the game goes and the more complex it is, the harder it is to understand. Okay, how do I win? Right? Another kind of, and I'm going on a little bit of tangent here, but
No, go
another
for it.
really interesting thing to me is like, okay, air like versus air toss. Zerg is like, okay, I'm gonna go like 100% corruptors and vipers. It's like I can't actually win with that army. Like I can't
Mm.
actually kill you. Like yeah, I can kill your army, but I like what am I gonna do? Am I gonna pull my drones after and then like no, you're gonna morph broods, but like in the moment you're like, I have an army that I can't actually beat you with. And I think that applies too for like phoenixes. People hate phoenixes, but it's like it's okay, dude. Like they can't actually kill you with phoenixes. They can get ahead, but like they can't attack buildings. You can't actually lose the game to phoenixes. They have they have to make something else to kill you. So that's always been really interesting, is like these army compositions and understanding, okay, this is not how the game is going to end, but this might be how I get ahead, or this might be how I deal with this huge problem, but I have to go to something else eventually to,
Hmm.
unless they just leave or something, right? You know?
Those are great points, and I would agree a bit more with apoptosis
Yeah.
on these five here. And a couple things that came to mind to me, and I think you guys covered really well these points. But the book that we talked about a while back, "Thinking in Bets" by Annie Duke, especially on the calculation and the victory side of things, that it's a little bit of tacit knowledge of being able to estimate where you're at, knowing with imperfect information what to do next and how to take battles and so forth, and then what do you need to do to finish that game, which is
Hmm.
is a really important point. And I think every one of us who's played StarCraft has lost a game somewhere along the line because we knew we were ahead versus a player, but then we couldn't actually dot the I's and cross the T's to finish the game. We
Hmm.
didn't have the right army. We didn't tech up. We were like, we're way ahead. Just leave the game already, right? And we lose games that way and we get frustrated. But the reality is that takes a while to build up that database in your brain of, okay, in this situation I need to do this, I need to do X, and in this other situation I need to do Y, and this other situation I need to do Z, and those will end the game. Just like how phoenixes actually don't end the game for anybody, they do push you ahead. And the one thing that you said, Apoptosis, I thought was quite interesting about build orders in StarCraft, and like, does anybody actually know? And it reminded me of speed running, and speed running is like, a thing that I love to watch. I don't do it, but I'm at awe at people who run,
Hmm.
especially these old NES games, and they do these incredible frame perfect moves and finish games in incredible amounts of time. And one thing they do to find new ways to run, especially older games, is this. It's called TAS. It's a tool assisted speed run, and so it's actually a computer that goes frame by frame into every possibility of a run and tries to figure out the most efficient way to do something. And there have been more than one occasion, especially in the game like Super Mario Brothers, which has been out for ages, right? More than one occasion that something new was found with a tool assisted speed run that a human just can't reproduce. And then eventually somebody, some maniac gets so good at practicing this one move that they can pull it off. And boom, we get a new speedrun world record that's, a third of a second faster, or something like that. And these calculations that are made, if you are a StarCraft player and you are interested in like doing timing attacks, or especially in the first couple of minutes of the game, following a build order in the first couple of minutes of the game, I'd say up to 3 or 4 minutes, there's nothing wrong with that. There's really nothing going on, right? So you're kind of
Yep.
just, why not follow something? Um, and if you convince yourself that, yeah, floating a bunch of minerals is okay, well, you do put yourself behind in certain situations. Not, especially like not getting production early on. Like if your barracks is late getting down, well, when the slow lings come marching up your ramp, you're not going to have a Reaper to defend. And what do you, yeah, I mean, you quite literally lose the game. And so there's times where calculation can be hyper precise like that. And there's other times where calculation to me also means something like, okay, looking at situation, I'll make the numbers in my head. Can I sacrifice my army to sacrifice their army? And will I be ahead after that?
Mm.
A little bit more like chess, where if you've gotten ahead a piece in the game, sacrificing down pieces actually helps your advantage in the long run, going to the end game. So, there's a lot of ways to interpret these sort of ideas, but I think overall, they're extremely important parts of the game. And each one you could spend a lot of time practicing. Like we talk about focus practice, where we take one aspect. You can take an aspect like victory and make that your focus practice for a week or a day or whatever you want. And really think, okay, in this situation, I'm going to evaluate what are the terms of victory here and try and achieve those.
Hmm. Yeah, very cool. I'm glad that you both kind of had a better take on this than me, because, like I say, I forced myself to come to some conclusions because I felt I needed to. Right, I didn't want to gloss over it. But yeah, it didn't sit right with me because I felt very unconfident about my interpretation. I especially like your point, Apoptosis, about balancing chance. What stuck out to me is actually defending in PvT when your opponent has chosen that you are not going to have very good information, which Terrans can do, right? They can spend
Yeah.
minerals to say you don't get to know stuff, right? And you're like, well, shit. Now I've got to choose your own adventure of the random horrible things you might be about to do to me, and I have to do this chance of calculation. What's the meta like right now? What have I seen? Have I seen anything? Did I scout 2 gases before you walled me out? And then you got to play this game of like, all right, which one do I think it's going to be? And maybe there's a range that have a similar defense, so I'm going to go there, right? There's just these different kinds of things.
Yeah, I really like that. And I think a really neat kind of exercise, I don't know if it's super valuable in the moment of playing the game,
Mm.
but is looking at all of these qualities, but from your opponent's side as well.
Mm-hmm.
Especially victory. I think that in balancing chance. Alternatively to victory, there's defeat, right? And we talked about it earlier. Sometimes you can just win by making less mistakes than they do.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes you'll play a game and in your head it makes the most sense, but maybe to another person it doesn't. And what I refer to is like, okay, I just won maybe some huge encounter. I killed a ton of drones. Um, but I didn't have enough to like win right at that moment, right? And what I'll do is I'll put like 2 or 3 spores down at every base. And they're like, what do you like? Why did you do that? Why did you just do that? You're playing Roach versus Roach, you know that. And I'll go, well, the only way I feel that I could lose right now is if they suddenly, like, if they had fewer roaches because they were going mutas or something like that, and I didn't know that. So I'm going to take the 600, 800 minerals, which a pro player obviously wouldn't really want to do that because that's all really necessary. But me, being not very good, I'll go, okay, well, what is alternative to victory? I'll win if this game just keeps going, for
Mm-hmm.
sure. What is the only way I could lose? How
Yeah.
can I lose this game, like, right now? And if they just didn't know, and I think that's putting balancing chance and victory kind of together. And sometimes it's just like, okay, I need to know, I need to like just blind counter this random thing in case they have it.
Mm-hmm.
And I can afford to do that because of how ahead I am. And the second those mutas show up in that 1 out of 10 games that happens, you feel like an absolute god because you're
Yeah.
like, oh yeah, man, I'm so good at this game, bro. Look at this. I just knew I had the intuition, the game sense, right? Or the DTs, right? Like, okay, the only way they could win now is if they just have 10 invisible dudes just walk into my base and kill everything I have.
Yep.
So I won't belabor the point too long here, but there's just so much here that I think you could literally just take this one little list of bullet points and be like, all right, let's just talk about this for 2 hours.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's like the M Canning meme where every game is against Zerg. Is this mutas? It's mutas. It's definitely mutas.
It's always
it's like
mutas,
hardly,
yeah.
yeah, it's always mutas. It's hardly ever
Yep.
mutas, but it's always mutas, right?
Yeah.
Because it's that one thing that'll just like, well, I didn't plan for mutas, so I lose. It's
Right.
like, I guess I'm dead now.
Yeah. One of the things that's quickly becoming a favorite of mine on this show is the extrapolation to other games, right? So, you know, the common thread for all of us here is StarCraft, and that's always going to be what we talk about most. And you know, like Apop, you said, you know, StarCraft is my only game. It's just kind of like competitively, that's my thing. But you know, as we have different guests, you know, come on and talk, and as Adraseth and I dabble in this or that, you know, other thing, it's really interesting when some lesson kind of coalesces itself, like what you just said about, you know, let me imagine what they could have that I lose to is like word for word something that I've described in Magic, which I play at a fairly high level.
Oh, okay. I've played Magic for sure.
Okay, great. Yeah. So
Yeah.
you know, exact same concept. It's like, all right, you're basically dead. So now I'm going to envision the horrible scenario where you have that one, you know, like this series of 3 top decks in a row that's like so statistically unlikely. And I'm going to play as though you have that because I win even if I'm wrong about that. And then, yeah, that godlike feeling of, you know, your opponent's like, I got my runner.
I can't believe it. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, I definitely was. I mean, I used to work at a comic store, so I played a ton of Magic the Gathering and a ton of like all these other games too. And I think you see this where balancing chance and victory becomes way more applicable when it's not a game of perfect information.
Mm-hmm.
There's no chance in chess. I mean,
Right.
besides maybe like, what is he gonna do? That's the only chance, but you have perfect information.
Mm-hmm.
Like, but Magic the Gathering, card games, StarCraft 2, there is a fog of war. There is some unknown factor to it that you have to try to account for. And the better you are at that, just like you said, okay, I'm gonna play as if this is the only way I can lose. I'm going to play everything I have around this. And I think that's like, okay, I'm not going to play this creature I have in my hand because if he wipes my board, then I still have something I can win with or whatever. Even though I
Mm-hmm.
could, like, I
Yep.
have everything I need, I could totally do it. I'm just going to hold on to it.
Yep.
Or you don't play that last land, right? I think that from the opposite side, playing like you have something, the bluff, like, okay, I have a mountain, and that's it. That's all I
Yep.
have. But I'm not gonna play it because it's like I don't need to for one, and then now you have to account for some unknown information. Where the second you put down all the cards in your hand, they now have perfect information. You
Yeah.
have nothing, and so that's like you wanna keep that sense of, well, what is that card? You wanna
Mm-hmm.
get them thinking, right? And that's such a lovely part of playing games.
Yeah, that's
Mhm.
one of my favorite things to teach new players actually is to always hold that extra land, right?
Hold
Because
that land. Hold the land. Yeah.
yeah, it's such a fun little lesson. Like new Magic players can internalize that very quickly, and then they get that little hee hee hee. I'm fooling my opponent. They get that little joy out
Yeah,
of it.
exactly. Yep. Yep. I love it. But I know we have so much to talk about, so I don't want to keep us on this point. But again, these are all just like, oh, well, what about this? And it's so cool.
Right? Yeah, yeah. No, it's
Mhm.
so fun. So okay, you had this kind of example about so Sun Tzu gets into kind of like the numbers game, right? Where he's like, if you
Yeah.
if you have this kind of outnumbering, and you had a comment here that I think is really interesting.
Yeah. So there was this quote I think one of you guys put down. And it had to do with understanding how to manage an army that had a certain amount of numbers. If you have more numbers than your opponent, you do this. If you have an equal amount, you can do
Mm-hmm.
this. If you have less than they do, you can do this. And I think that understanding how that works in a game of StarCraft 2 is huge because if you have more like we always say StarCraft 2 is just like a numbers game. If you just have whoever makes more stuff is in the more likely scenario to win. That's like that's the shortest A to B victory, right? I have more things than you. I attacked with those more things faster than you did, and now I win because you had less things than I did.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously there's way more that goes into it than just that, but that is in a traditional game you could see that being a common theme most of the time.
Mm-hmm.
But what if that's not where you're at, right? What if you have a less than they do? What if you're cutting something because you're like, I'm trying to eke out this little tech advantage, or I'm trying to eke out more drones. I want to play greedy. I want more drones than they do, but that means that my army is small. How do you manage doing that? And it's really interesting to see how players will take that and then move that into some kind of advantage.
Mm-hmm.
Giant armies, Protoss, right? Or will just like, boom, I have my gigantic death ball. I'm going to move across the map. I'm going to kill you. Zerg doesn't normally really do that. We don't really just like, okay, I have a giant death ball. I can beat anything in my path now. No,
Mm-hmm.
we're more like, okay, I have 10 guys here. I have 5 guys over here, and I have like 30 dudes over there. Okay, I'm gonna take the 10 guys. I'm gonna go over here. I'm gonna take the 5 guys. I'm gonna go over here. It's all about knowing how to get the most advantage out of your units in that situation, understanding what it is that they're good for and what they're terrible against, and then trying to just leverage as much advantage out of that. The two units I think is like the most key for that are banelings, which are completely expendable, disposable units. Like Adresseth said earlier, you don't want to just blindly run them in, but at the same time, you understand that at the end of that engagement, if everything goes perfectly, you will lose those units. Like they're dead now.
Right.
Whereas mutas are like 100% different than that. Mutas are like the most fragile thing known to man, and their entire purpose is just to stay alive as long as possible while just like every now and again attacking something or
Mm-hmm.
looking for that exposed kind of weakness, right? And there's a lot of different ways you can play. Obviously you don't have to make mutas, you don't have to make banelings, but understanding what is the point of this unit and how do I leverage it to the maximum.
Right.
um Without belaboring the point too much, I usually tell people there are units in the game that change how it is that you're going to win at this point.
Hmm.
Swarm host being one of them, you no longer are going to win in a traditional sense. You're not going to just, I have my big army, I'm going to move across the map and kill you. Swarm hosts, you have to play extremely differently in Broodlords.
Mm.
Broodlords are, okay, they are now your win condition. Everything else you have is just to protect them and keep those alive as long
Hmm.
as possible. So you're not like, okay, I'm going to attack with my army before my Broodlords get there. No, the army sits right underneath because those broods are way too expensive and they're way too good for you to just leave them. So that is how you win. Swarm hosts are, okay, I'm going to constantly prod and poke at this guy and agitate the hell out of him. And either I keep him contained to this tiny base count and economy, and then I eventually win, or I force them to move out with an army that they don't want to move out with a composition that's not going to win, and then I crush that fight and then I win after that. So
Hmm.
just that one kind of understanding your numbers and then also the units within and knowing how to use those to the best of their ability. I always am like, because people want to take swarm hosts and like run them in, and I'm like, no, God, that is not how we play those. Like, oh my God, you have like, let's talk, man. We need to talk about this a little bit. Like, oh boy.
Yeah, yeah. So, hopefully, I'm not putting you guys too on the spot with this, but I'm gonna go with it. I can feel us all having a good time riffing on these concepts, right? And the text lends itself to that, right? So we're
Hmm.
we're an hour in. We try to package these shows real tight and do, an hour and a half. What do you think about not rushing ourselves and just saying at some point here we're going to do part 2, just
Yeah,
sometime in
that's totally
2021.
fine with me.
Let's do that, man, cuz I feel like I'm looking at the rest of our notes. I'm like, this shit is too good for me to strike through it and try to say, "Oh yeah, we covered this book." Like,
We
nah,
could
man,
spend
let's
5 hours on
Well,
this.
yeah, we'll
Oh,
figure out what
easily,
what
yeah.
month we want to do it. I mean, for me, it's like, well, shoot, I got an archives episode in the can. We'll just have old Apop on it.
There you
Um,
go, man. Absolutely, I'd love to come back and keep talking about this
all
because
right.
I wanted to certainly look at the book a lot more too,
Mm-hmm.
and I got so we have so much on here already, but I know like there are quotes that I remember in my head, but I'm like, where was that? I
Yeah.
can't find that again.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I would definitely be down for that, man, for
All
sure.
right, let's kick it into low gear then and savor some of these topics, and
Hell yeah.
we'll I'll come back through after the fact, and we'll figure out when we want to do part 2.
I want to say to what Apoptosis just talked about, especially because it's having more or having less. I mean, StarCraft is one of those games, especially where we have on the screen at all times a unit counter, right? We
Mm.
have
Yep.
this of 200 supply unit counter, and we gauge ourselves so often on that. And I want to say a couple things to that because one thing that really commonly gets told to new and up and coming beginner players who've just got the game, they just want to learn to play the game, it's really a fun game, and they're like, how do I beat X? How do I beat banelings?
Yep.
How do I beat tanks? How do I beat battle cruisers? And for the most part in StarCraft, the conventional wisdom is that, well, if you just macro, it almost literally doesn't matter what you
Yep.
build, right? You can just build Marines. You could build only Marines, and probably all the way up to about Diamond. You can win all your games just running across the map. And even if you lose most of them, it doesn't matter. And there's this idea in StarCraft that just working on the economy side of things to just have overwhelming numbers, right? And this is a little bit, if you think about how Brood War operates, this is a little bit how Zerg feels in Brood War, where the Zerg is literally the swarm. They just are overwhelming you with units after units after units, and that's how they win games. StarCraft's different. StarCraft 2 is different because it's the dynamics of the game, the mechanics of the game are different. But for a lot of times, one good way, one good strategy, and it will win you a lot of games. It's just build more stuff than your opponent. Have that overwhelming number. And then as you get more sophisticated in the game, you start having to refine. Okay, well, you can't just build Marines because your opponent will just hard counter them, right? Eventually, you get to the point where roaches don't just break everything down, and you can't win every game with just roaches. You have to have other things. But that's a good way to go. And
I
alternatively,
disagree. I will pin in there just for a second, but you keep going. But I
as I say,
disagree with that
alternatively,
last little bit.
another way to play is the style, and I always bring this up. I try to. It seems like every episode I try to bring up Florencio, Printf, Haas, and Grimmy, and anybody else that plays kind of the weird style, right? The style that is you know unorthodox, really weird unit compositions, secret bases, cannons, all sorts of. That's another way to play as well, and in those cases, actually, I think you have to be more precise about what you can and can't have. Recently I just watched Hearthstone took an hour of time with Printf and they played to learn how to beat cannon rushes. And it's
Yeah.
it's an incredible hour because Hearthstone is like over 6K MMR on EU. He's an
Mhm.
incredibly good player. And he's so frustrated that Printf is beating him with just cannons. And
Yeah.
he said at the time, he's like, how is this guy so annoying? How did he get so good with probes? I don't understand. And what it is that Printf has made, such a database in his brain of all the calculations, every aspect of the game where he knows he's slightly ahead here, slightly behind here, do this move, do that move. That is a way more nuanced way to play. And it's interesting because both are valid ways to play the game. But a lot of times we tell players like, okay, you want to win a game, build more stuff, and macro is a pathway to get there.
Yeah, so there's quite a lot that you said that I can 100% resound with. So recently I did just a fun like Christmas stream, but I just cannon rushed people. That's all I did. I said, okay, I asked them at the end of the game, have you been naughty, have you been nice, whatever it was. If they were like, nope, I've been bad this year, they got a cannon rush. But I learned for probably an hour from Grimmy, actually. Funny you mentioned him, how to cannon rush people. And I'm in Grimmy's stream quite a bit. We hang out and chat and whatnot. And the it's literally a complete like, okay, Protoss, you can literally actually do this because people are like cannons. It's the easy mode. Absolutely not. It is
Right.
so freaking hard. It is near impossible because they're like, okay, you need to know how to perfect three building wall off. You need to have a higher understanding of the state of the game than even macro players because I think macro players you have the the cushion of economy,
Hmm.
right? They do not have that because they are literally trying to win the game with as few moves as possible. They're trying to rush to the victory screen, if you will. Whereas macro players were like, okay, how do I craft this game in my favor to win? Of course, there's a lot that goes into that as well. I'm not saying one way is harder than the other, but cannons and things like that are just absolutely not the easy win. In fact, I would probably say it's easier to learn how to macro than it is how to cannon rush people. Cannoning people
Wow.
is freaking hard to do it properly. Like
Hmm.
maybe lower leagues, right? Like they see a cannon, they have no idea what to do. But the second that somebody starts to learn how to do it, it is just incredibly difficult, in my opinion. But it's very fun and it's very rewarding because you're also like you're playing like the oily, greasy strategy.
Right.
Um, One thing I said I disagreed with you on, and you said roaches can't just win the game. Funny you mentioned that. And you're not wrong, absolutely. But I was saving, and I think it kind of comes into play here a little bit. I think it's Aora, you put a quote down a little bit further here, which is throw something odd and inaccountable into
Yeah.
your opponent's way. And we don't have to go through that whole thing right now. I'm sure you have some juicy stuff for that. But that is literally the entire way I play versus Terran. I do not play Lingbane. I don't play Lingbane versus Terran ever. I don't care if you're going bio. I don't care if it's mech. I play the 3 roach build. Are you guys familiar with that one? I'm
I
sure
am.
you
Yeah.
have seen it. Okay. So I literally will just like, you make 2 super early lings. Let me kind of backtrack a little bit because I think it works into this quote beautifully as well. Of Terran loves to be the aggressor. They're assuming like, yep, my Reaper's going to go across the map, and I'm going to probably find 4 Zerglings there because that's the perfect number to make. and then maybe I'll get a drone, maybe I'll harass, but I'll get a nice scout, stuff like that. What they don't expect is two Zerglings to be on their side of the map right about the time when the Reaper leaves. And if you can duck that Reaper, or if they don't scout or something, I will every single time delay that command center that you're making on the low ground with two Zerglings, which is like,
Mm-hmm.
I have to pull my Reaper back for two Lings. What is happening, right? Or better yet, one Marine. Two Zerglings beats one Marine, by the way, if unless they micro it well enough, right? So it's like I just lost my first unit I made to two Lings. Like, what is happening in this game?
Mm.
So already you're putting them off their stance. And then three Roaches come out and it puts them off their stance even further. And then 8 Mutas come out and it puts them off their stance even further. And then you kill them with just this gigantic swarm of Roaches. But it's this constant, you do not understand what's happening, and you do not, like, this is not your comfort zone that I know that you like to play in as a Terran player. My creep spread when I do this is absolutely terrible. But it doesn't matter, right? Because I have stolen that aggression from the very beginning of the game. And unless you've seen this before, or unless you have an idea of how to counter this, which is not incredibly easy, because the things that are good versus Roaches are not necessarily good versus Mutas, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you're layering this constant harass. And you are definitely behind. Like, the Terran will be ahead unless they make some travesty mistake or something like that. They'll be ahead, but they won't understand, because you're constantly forcing them to not understand what it is they need to prepare for next. But man, ZVT is my best matchup. So that was something that I'm like, no, you totally can just make Roaches, man, I swear. But you need to put yourself in a position where at that point it doesn't matter what you make, it doesn't matter what you have just constantly set them off of their game for so long that I could just have like 100 Lings and it would still do the same thing, right? It just doesn't
Right.
matter anymore at that point. If everything's gone perfectly, it doesn't matter. But it is such a beautiful thing that ties into that quote Aorot put, I think, so perfectly.
Yeah. So okay, I'm gonna spiral off of the thing that you just said, and then I do want to go back to that quote because I like the thing that you put right beneath it, because I watched that same game that you referenced beneath that quote. You're talking about, okay, so but first let's talk about this initiative thing, because I mentioned earlier, right, that I was raised up on this advice, just macro forehead, just have more stuff.
Yep.
And I ran into so much trouble because I didn't develop my ability to look away from my base or to look away from my army. It was like, I'm doing this and I'm maxed and we're going, right?
Yep.
And I didn't develop, the ability to do what you were talking about with sort of not calculation, the one after that, the one about chances, right? Where you go, okay, what have I scouted? What could it mean? How do I develop that, right? So I started doing the same thing as you. Funnily enough, also against Terran. Where because you're right, their thing is I'm going to execute cleanly. I'm going to hit this timing. There's mines going in. Okay, next thing I'm going to hit you with this, tank bio push. Okay, next thing, I'm going to do this next. And it's like they're hitting this checklist of just timings and screwing with you. And you're constantly looking over here, looking over there. There's medevacs flying all over the damn place, right? And instead, if you can go, when's the last time you got attacked by a Protoss? When's the last time you got attacked by a Zerg, right? It feels like, so you said it really well, right? That like, on paper, you're quote unquote behind, but I don't buy it. Like it, and it sounds like you don't either, right? Like, there's an intuition that although on paper you're behind, what you've actually done is exchange something, right? I've exchanged material, right? If we want to do the chess analogy, and I've traded that for you are out of your comfort zone, or you're going to react more slowly, or you're out of position, right? Or some combination of them. And I actually used to do this when I was learning chess as a kid. I would intentionally trade queens with the opponent, because I felt more comfortable with them not being on the board. And my opponents didn't, right? People love their queen. So I would just be like, I'm going to ram my queen into your queen, and you can go ahead and you can take mine, whatever, we're going to play like this. I think that there's really something to it, both from a standpoint of what Printf calls the off-meta advantage, right? We're going to Sewer Town. You don't know about these rules, right?
Right. Where
Um,
you've been playing and like that's your build. Like that is literally the only build I play versus Terran. I've played
mhm,
probably maybe a couple hundred games of those now. You've become like this. Okay, this is the way that I'm gonna win. This is exactly how I'm gonna do it. You have never seen this before,
right.
and you almost give them a sense of like, is this guy just bad? Like, did
Yeah.
they are they just not like nobody sends two lings across the map first thing. That just doesn't happen. Nobody
Mhm,
does that because it's not good in any other situation except for I know all that I want to do with those two lings is keep your Reaper at home and then maybe delay your orbital by a little bit of time. So
mhm,
it's like, okay, I lost those lings, but he had to move his SCV off. They have done the perfect amount of work that I need them to do.
mhm,
And now I'm set up for the three roaches to come across the map. And then at that point, it's okay. The only thing I need to do with these guys is once again spawn some kind of reaction, kill the Reaper if I can, and then now I'm set up to put a Spire down in a location that nobody would ever put it down so that when you scan, and this happens, it's the you feel like an absolute god too you put the spire in like some random corner of the base where it's completely exposed and it would go down in seconds. But that's not where you scan because that's not where normal people will
Hmm.
put that down.
right.
Normal people put that down behind their hatch or like in a more guarded position. But I am valuing I'm trading that exposed position for you not having perfect information anymore.
Mhm,
And I want to continue to roll that through if I can.
mhm.
And it's when it comes together, you're like, I'm a devious maniacal genius.
Yep.
And when you see two scans go down and they barely just don't hit the spire, you're like, I'm god at this game. I know exactly what I'm doing. This is perfect.
Yep.
And this is a lot of how Florencio beats people who have, and it's no offense to Florencio, and he would admit it,
Nope.
who have better mechanics, they have better micro, they generally could play the game fast, but he will make their head explode because he does something that nobody does, and they're like, this person must be bad. What's going on?
Mhm,
And they
Yep.
don't know how to react in that situation. It's such a great example of deceit in warfare, which is talked
mm,
about in this book as well. And I had put down later in the notes to talk about SOS because he's a Protoss player that's kind of well known for being deceitful and proxying buildings all over the place. But it's this idea of taking an advantage, and like Eric, you're saying, the sort of trading with pieces on a chessboard. It's the
mhm,
tempo advantage. You're taking an advantage. You're giving up something, your macro advantage or your economy advantage. You're giving that up to take a tempo advantage against your opponent and really confuse them, put them into a situation where they don't have a working model for what's going on. They don't really know how to respond, and they're lacking really critical information like, hey, there's air units coming, right? And I think this is
Right.
also something to be said about how we play in general. When you're behind in a game, if you are the aggressor and you're economically behind in a game, or you're just overall economically and army advantage behind in a game, being the aggressor is an excellent way to come back because you're keeping the other opponent at home. You're keeping the other opponent having to defend, which is a bit harder than attacking because they don't know where the attack's going to come from. And you see this with like swarm hosts, with like mutas, certain banshees harassing units that come in. They're going to hit over here, then they're going to hit on the other side. And what the opponent is trying to do is to keep the a player who's had the advantage, the economic advantage, at home, so they can kind of get the advantage. They can catch up. They can get that tempo advantage to work in their favor. And these are such great concepts that span every single video game that's competitive that you can possibly play, right? From Magic the Gathering to chess to StarCraft to Counter-Strike to any League of Legends, any game like that, you can apply these tools to.
very, very cool.
Yeah, there's you said something a little earlier, AR, which was playing off meta.
Mm,
Playing like that's something that's really interesting to me because even just like like flipping the script a little bit if you will, and
mhm,
you don't have to play like crazy like, oh my god, I'm gonna make I'm gonna take a proxy base over here and I'm gonna do all this stuff. No, you don't have to necessarily do that.
mhm,
But playing Terran in like a defensive style, or something like that. Terran are super good at defensively playing. They're crazy good at it, in fact. But it is more traditional for Terrans, especially if they're playing bio, to be the aggressor. And so that's what Zerg is used to. That's what Protoss is used to. Okay, I need to defend against these Marines. I need to defend against these drops. I need to, I need to do all this stuff. And then by defending those nicely, I can get ahead and eventually win.
Hmm.
Or versus Protoss, for instance, okay, I need to, scout their timing and how many bases. If you can somehow flip the script while still staying safe, and this goes all the way back to understanding and balancing chance here. If you can, because you can't just blindly like, okay, I'm going to play aggressive Zerg. I'm going to make a pool and I'm going to make some lings, and then no, great, I'm the aggressor now. It's like,
Hmm.
no, you need to have an idea or a reason what you're doing with all of these things and how they're going to put you ahead, because you're not only are you now giving up the economic lead, but you also need to you need to get some kind of value out of that in order for you to stay, in order for you to actually trade that initiative over to you.
Hmm.
Because if an ill-timed rush or going into some kind of aggressive stance without knowing how to control that part properly, or like knowing what it is that you're supposed to accomplish with that, is a great way to just go, okay, well, I'm going to lose now to like 10 Marines. I'm just
Right.
dead. And having built-in responses, kind of like what you were saying earlier on, is using that information that you would like gain from those attacks, from those scouts, and having a built-in response. That's why cannon rushing, right? We were talking about cannon
Mm,
rushing, how there's all these crazy, like the rabbit hole goes extremely deep,
right.
right, on how to win with a cannon rush. And you'll see that really good builds are they take into account those possible branches of the game, right? If I
Hmm.
talk about the three roach a little bit, you make a spire, right, at this time,
Hmm.
and you are safe against BCs automatically because you
Ah,
have the spire. It's already done.
right.
Regardless if they've made it or not, you are going to make that spire, but now you're in this really, really, really good position to just deal with battle cruisers. Where if instead of a spire you went for an infestation pit or something like that and go swarm host or something, you've now, oh, I'm not ready for that. I am no
Hmm.
longer prepared to deal with this unit type um, that that could be coming my way. So that could be a risk or a balance you're trying to juggle and figure out. So
Yeah.
really good builds, in my opinion. And I'm not saying that bad builds can. So when I say good builds, bad builds, I'm not saying like bad builds are going to lose 100% of the time.
Hmm.
Bad builds will win all the time,
Hmm.
constantly. But good builds, I think, are builds that can be 100% scouted and you're still doing well. Like it's fine. It doesn't matter if they know or not, because it's just a solid way to play.
Yeah. Back
Bad
to
builds are, I need them to not know that this is happening so
uh-huh.
that I can win. But I can maybe still win anyways if they don't.
Right. Yeah, back to Nero's concept of solidness, right?
Yes. Yeah,
Where
absolutely.
you're saying I'm going to do this in a way where I mean, yeah, it's great if I sucker punch you. Yeah, it's cool. I'll take it. If I surprise you, fine. But even if I don't, now, I've got an edge. A recent tweak that I made. So I'm like the adept guy, right? Have adept emotes in my Twitch.
Nice.
And for, I don't know, my entire career since Silver, I've been doing the Neeb style, like 2016 era 7 adept before anybody gave a shit at the pro level about making adepts, right? For 2017, 2018, 2019, nobody cared, right?
Yep.
All of a sudden it's meta, which sucks for my win rate. Horrible. Um, and that was its own form of off meta advantage, I guess, because it was an outdated build, but it was still good, right? Secretly,
Mhm.
low key, it was always kind of fine. And I recently abandoned that opening. And
Okay.
what I changed for? Are you familiar with Pili Pili's 420 challenge?
No.
Maybe not. What is it?
The
What is the
the
420
Pili
challenge?
Pili 420 challenge is he made this YouTube video of a Zest adept opening, and it's the one that you probably have seen and know, where Prism flies across, warps in 4, and 4 more had walked across, and it's an 8 adept timing, kind of early as possible, hits around
Yep.
420ish. So I've changed over to that way of doing it, and they hit almost exactly the same time. The Zest version is much more technical. It's very difficult to execute. The timing that your Adept Scout comes out is a little bit later. It's at a time where you need to be doing a lot of macroing back home, and the task switching is incredibly hard. I'm not able to macro it as cleanly as I can with my Neeb style 7 Adept Opener. However, it is significantly more solid against
Mhm.
a form of early roach aggression. Captain Hop is in chat. He actually showed me this. He goes, when I scout Twilight off of in the front of the base off the Overlord, I always do this roach punish. And he did it to
Okay.
me, blew me out of the water. I'm just like, oh, wait, you mean if my opponent just knows this, I lose? Oh, bummer, right? He's like, yeah, because you don't have a robo. You can't get a robo and an immortal quick enough to hold this. Even if you know I'm going to do it, even if you make a bunch of batteries, you're just
Doesn't
dead.
matter.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what's cool about the 420 variant, right, is you have the robo. So if you scout the tells that your
Mm.
opponent's going to do this, you just abort the build, get an immortal
Yes.
instead, and all of a sudden you hold, right? So it plays with this concept of solidness where it's like, I'm going to get the same outcome, but I'm going to do it in a way that's a little bit more solid, a little bit more resilient to the different things you might be doing.
Yeah, I can definitely resound with that. I'm just that because I was talking about it so much, that 3 roach play very easily goes, okay, well, they're not taking a third base. They're just making a bunch of units. They're going to try to kill me.
Mm-hmm.
And that is a very easy way to lose the game is, okay, I just made 8 units. They're in production. Now there's 16 Marines
Mm.
and like 2 siege tanks. I lose. Like, you'll just lose. There's no way you can really hold at that point. They'll get
Mm-hmm.
too much damage done. But it very easily just goes, if you see that, you just don't put the spire down. Instead, you just make like 9 or 10 more roaches
Yep.
instead with that money you were going to make mutas with. And that's a flexibility to change your plan.
Mm-hmm.
And I would say that is like making that switch up for you and putting having that robo available is is making your plan have blind checks and ready and like counters kind of ready to go,
Mm-hmm.
right? You're not playing exposed anymore. You're taking into account a possible and fairly likely response and already countering it even before they do it. If they don't do it, it doesn't matter because it was a part of the build and you're still going to get to the same end result that you want. But if they do it, now you're in a much better position.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah, this
that is a really nice thing to do when your build kind of thinks of you a little bit and like, I had this spire already. Now I can just make corruptors and their BC is completely trashed or whatever it is, right?
right. Andrew Seth, you had something?
It's a really interesting thing what you both are talking about and talking around is the idea of meta versus off meta play, what we call in StarCraft meta versus off meta, where there are builds that are, quote unquote meta at certain times. There are builds that are just generally safe, right? We think of in StarCraft 2, we think of, for example, Terran, a 1/1/1 opening with an expansion is a very safe and reasonable opening versus a lot of matchups, right? Not just Zerg, but also versus Protoss in a lot of cases. And they're safe for a reason, right? You can get a lot of different types of units. You can respond to a lot of different types of aggression, but they don't cover every type of attack in the entire game. And I think this is something that we as players tend to forget because we will memorize something that has been touted by the community as the quote right thing to do, the way to play, right? And then when we counter something that we don't know or understand, we fall apart because we haven't developed the decision making to deal with it, right? And so it kind of is an interesting, what you're both talking about is extremely interesting because you're talking about what certain builds can and can't do, what certain builds can and can't counter. And as a defending player, if I put myself in that situation, I think about it. One of the skills that we have to be able to develop is knowing how and when to respond to attacks, right? And so taking the right fights at the right times and building the right units. And it's very tricky to do. But when we get off of our, little railroad amusement park ride build, it seems like a lot of players will fall apart. And I think this is one of the things that keeps a lot of people kind of, quote unquote stuck in diamond,
Mm.
where they're
Mhm.
not sure how to deviate from their build. Their macro just falls apart right as soon as that starts happening, right? They get harassed by mutas and they just stop building workers, right? They just
Right.
everything falls apart. They're floating thousands of minerals, thousands of gas. And how do you practice that? How do you get better at that? It's a tricky thing to do. I don't have a perfect answer, but it's those games and those situations where you encounter things you don't know. There's so much opportunity for learning and growth as a player because you're dealing with situations you don't know. It's that unknown area that you can really grow from.
Hmm. Yeah, I
There's a Oh, go ahead.
okay, I'll get it in quick because I want you to have a chance,
Yeah,
and I do
no
want to
worries, no
do.
worries.
I want us to close too with your Andrew Seth went back to the something unaccountable. I want to close with that story and a couple of quick hits from Q&A, but I got to get this one in too.
Yeah.
So the thing that you just said, Andrew Seth, and actually kind of what you were talking about too, Apop. So I have felt stuck for a good while now at the level that I'm at. And very recently I started saying to people like, "Oh, I get it now. Like I mentally the breakthrough has happened. I just need to do the work now to get there. But like finally I see the path forward. And like I know I can get back to Diamond 1 because I got back to Diamond 1 off of just doing my builds clean. That is a matter of time. I can get that. But getting better than that, I finally see like what that path is. Um and it has to do with the thing that you're saying where you are on that like happy path, my railroaded build. I just do these things, um maybe not taking into account my opponent, right? And then all of a sudden something weird happens and I'm like, oh shucks, well this didn't go according to plan, right? And I think that that happens to people because of this advice of like, just do your build rate, just do your build rate. We don't develop or even allow ourselves to try to go, I'm going to have an idea about what's happening in this game. I'm going to have an original thought in my head about maybe what I should do. And like, it's fine for that to go wrong. It is especially hard if you're a streamer and you're trying to have an original idea in your head while there's, a bunch of meme lords in the chat ready to jump on you and tell you why your idea was stupid and you should never try to have another one, right? But I'm getting to the point where it's like, well, okay, this other thing doesn't work. So I'm just gonna try stuff, dude. Like, and we'll go from there.
Yeah, I totally can agree with that because I used to play ZVT was just the stock standard, make some lings, make a lot of queens, get to
Mm-hmm.
that ling bane, maybe go hide, all of these steps, right? And it's just a very good way to play. Like that is, I'm not ever saying that's a bad way to play. It teaches you everything that you need to know about the game. Everything is there. In fact, I usually do for players who are newer or struggling. I say you should focus on macro instead of cheesing or doing all ins. And the reason I say that is not because I think cheesing is bad or not because I think all ins are bad, but if you play macro, you are getting the skills that you
Yeah.
need to cheese and all in people anyways.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you ever want to do that later on, you can totally you'll be able to transition to that very well. But if you only learn how to cheese or you only learn how to all in, you won't really get to that. Obviously, you could learn it the other way around too, but
Mm-hmm.
you might as well learn it like just kind of make it easier for yourself later on. Um, and I caveat all that by saying StarCraft 2 is a video game. You should play however the hell it is that you want to
Right.
play, right? Like just for a second, stand back and just go, it's a game. You can do whatever you want, dude. But
Mm-hmm.
if you want my opinion, this is what it is.
Mm-hmm.
And I had something I wanted to say. Oh, I can't remember
I
what it
took too
was now,
long.
though.
Damn.
Shoot.
I was
No,
trying
no,
to
no,
get
no,
in and get
no.
out.
No, it was good. That's totally fine, man. I'm sure it'll come back to me.
Well,
Shoot.
let's
Now,
jump to the do
yeah.
something unaccountable story because you had a great anecdote for this, and
Yes.
I know this game too, so I want to talk about it.
Yeah. So I mean, it's your quote, man. You
Sure,
you
sure.
redo
So,
that,
so
buddy.
the quote is, "Throw something odd and inaccountable into your opponent's." I love that. Like Google is trying to tell me that's not a word, but it's definitely a word. So this is like the classic technique, right? Of doing annoying stuff with your units, right? Putting them in weird places, putting them there at weird times just to hinder what your opponent's doing. Just mess them up. Get them going, wait, what? You have that there now? Right? And their brain is just, we really underestimate, especially all you Twitch chat GMs, man. Oh, we really underestimate the amount of cognitive load induced on a poor human who sees that and has to like grind the gears into motion. Did you remember?
I remember what I was going to say now.
Do it.
Yes. Okay. Yeah, but it does tie into what you're
All right.
saying here as well. And that is, you were talking about, Adraseth, about games. How do you practice versus games where this is not standard, this isn't that, or whatever it is, or I lost to this crazy build. I forced myself not to think about those games more than I look at the replay. I go, I should have scouted here instead, and then I move on. Because if you, depending on how many times you can play a day or whatever, I play 20, 25 games a day or something like that, right? It's a little bit higher than most StarCraft 2 players can play. But I will encounter that build 1 out of 50 times, 1 out of 75 times. It is not a super great use of my time in getting better at StarCraft 2 in general, to sit and just try to analyze and tear apart what this guy did, more than just having kind of like a loose idea of, oh, I wasn't ready for this guy's DTs after this point. I should have made sure that I scouted by 3:45, which is like the time that I need to do it anyways, but I didn't do it this game because he threw me off with this. I have to remember, I should always do this anyways, and then I would be prepared, instead of going, well, this guy went one base DTs into this and that other thing, and it's like, doesn't matter what he did. How do you need to change this? How do you need to analyze, or what did you miss in your build that you probably needed to do anyways,
Right.
that could have made you more prepared for this?
Mm-hmm.
And we'll talk about the inaccountable in your opponent's way, but so I just wanted to sneak that back in.
Yeah.
I remembered it, and it's like, okay, I can't lose it again. I'll feel so stupid.
Yeah, no, I love that concept of like, because it's valuing your own time, right? It's I have a goal to get as strong as I can at the video game, right? And I only have so many hours alive on this earth to do it. So I damn well better prioritize, because if I'm gonna, deep dive the sewers and try to run all of that calculation, like, how many fewer games am I gonna get today? Okay,
right.
so I think I've laid out, this idea of like, do something weird, do it at a weird time, get your opponent crunching, right? The gears are turning in their head. There's so much cognitive load now for that person, where they're like, what does this even mean? What do I do to counter it? I don't have the normal stuff that I would have to deal with that in that spot at this time, right? Okay, so now that I've set it up for everybody, Apop, lay the story on them, because this is a doozy.
So there is a wonderful game that Neuro sent me, and I watched it, and I casted it. Actually, I do Thursdays. I do subcasting stuff. So Neuro sent me this one, and it blew my mind when I saw it. And was it, again, this goes back to a little bit of a concept of, was it good? No, this was not a good thing that you should probably do in your games, but it's still taking the idea that bad things can win if your opponent focuses too much on it, or freaks out about it, or whatever. But and who knows if this actually did anything? We don't have the other side of this conversation, so we don't know for sure. But I would like to say that it totally set up the game for victory at this point. But Nero, he was playing a ZVP, so he was playing versus Protoss. He was playing Zerg, and he went for a very early Spore. And so my seeing this, I didn't see him play this live, so he was obviously streaming. He's probably talking about all the things he's like, I have this brilliant idea. But so I didn't have any of that. So I just see this Spore, and it's not a time you need a Spore. It is way too early in the game to have it. There's literally no reason for it, right? And so, I go, okay, there's a Spore there. And he picks it up, and it's a long map. I think it was like Lightshade. It was Lightshade, actually. He picks it up. He makes it like in front of his natural. So it's like the first structure you see when you go there. He picks up the Spore. and he walks it over to his opponent's third base, and he just sits it there. He told me later that his plan was if it lived until he had a layer, he was going to drop creep and he was going to plant it on the ground. But like, if that is not the demonstration of throwing something inaccountable into your opponent's way, I don't know what is. He did win that game, by the way. It got to like a late game air toss composition, but he won that game. But you just love to see or think about what are those little things that won't cost me so much brain power or APM, but will cost my opponent a lot more.
Hmm.
That is like one thing that is a huge investment for that sort of thing. But we see this all the time. And these can sometimes they're dealt with just easily, super quickly, and it's like it did nothing. But sometimes it stops your opponent from doing something huge. And I think of Zerg at least, and I think of, well, okay, I could burrow a Ling at each of his
Hmm.
expansions. And that's at least a scan. That is at minimum he has to scan and then have units there. There's coordination involved
Hmm.
instead of just look at the base for 2 seconds and tell my orbital to drop and land there, right?
Hmm.
He now has to I have to at least move units there. I have to at least scan it at the time that my units are there, and then I can kill it. And then I have to remember to put my orbital back down again.
Yep.
Right? So for me, it was send the Ling, shift queue it up to burrow, and it
Hmm.
took me how long, right? For him, there's actually a decent amount. There's if you look at comparatively, there's way more thought into what he
Right.
has to do.
Right.
Or you can do this with like creep spread. If you drop creep at a base,
Mm.
you're saying, okay, this was way easier to deal with because you can just A move units, but you have to wait for the creep to finish out before you can drop it.
Hmm.
So he has to now remember where he had already remembered once, I need to put this base down. He has to now remember again, I need to put this base down because it's not down. Um, I think Neuro is one of the kings of doing this. He has his patented one muta harass that he does. He'll make a fire and he'll literally make a single mutalisk out of it. Is that good? Absolutely not. But the opponent sees a muta and knows that there's now a spire on the map and
Hmm.
knows that there's a possibility for more mutas, and he has to take that seriously. I mean, if you don't and he makes like 10 more mutas out of the blue, and you don't have any missile turrets here, you don't have anything that can deal with that.
Right.
You have like, what are you gonna? You're gonna feel stupid because you
Hmm.
saw the one muta. You knew that it was a possibility.
Right.
I love those kind of like big brain, low IQ plays. I like to
Yeah.
call them. It's like huge brain, but it's like the stupidest thing I can think of that you should do.
Yeah. I actually watched that game live on his stream. And I think, to some degree, Neuro talks about there's StarCraft and there's StreamerCraft, right? And so
Yes.
he may choose in a certain moment to do some StreamerCraft stuff. Maybe it's a game
Yeah.
he's already lost and he could do something entertaining or fun for a couple of minutes before the game ends. Why not? It's his job. He's putting on a show. He is trying to get better, but he's also trying to put on a show while he does it. So I think that was an interesting combination of doing like an entertaining streamercraft thing and also like a legit Sun Tzu thing. And as I watched that, and I was screaming about it in Twitch chat, nobody answered me or agreed or anything, but I saw opponent flinch. So
Uh-huh.
opponent flew over. I can't remember. I think it was like an oracle. Opponent flies over, and actually like they're moving towards the spore, and they flew away for a second. Like, oh shit, it's gonna shoot my oracle, because in your Protoss brain, I'm flying an oracle near a spore, right? Never mind the fact there's not creep on the ground and the thing's friggin' walking around, right? Like, it can't shoot you. But I saw opponent do the oh shit and like move it away,
Mm-hmm.
and then they realized after a split second, but you still made chemicals happen in their body, right? Like there was
Yep.
adrenaline there for that to happen. And that's not nothing, right? Like you used up that firing in that person's body when they did that, right? It either now they're on too much adrenaline or they're not going to have some to pump in later when something else happens.
That's an interesting point. And both of you kind of raised this, like the one me to harass or doing something unusual for your opponent when they are evaluating the situation that they're in. Right, they're making calculations. They're looking at what the army compositions. They're taking imperfect information. They're making all these decisions in their head as the commander of their army. And it's a little bit like when a Terran floats a medevac outside the base, outside the range of any static defense, but just floats it there within the vision of the opponent. The opponent will constantly now have to think about that medevac because at any moment it could come in and attack. It may never do anything. And I think Maru is one of the players that I know sometimes will do this. He'll even send empty medevacs
Mhm.
just for fun, right? Just
Yep.
to mess with people. And it's that big brain move, right? It's so dumb. Like, who sends an empty medevac? What's that going to do? Now the opponent is like, well, I gotta make a spore over there. I gotta get a soccer over there, and I gotta deal with that. And I have to keep checking the mini map because is it there? Did it move? And anybody who's played Protoss, against Terran, we all know medevacs can have widow mines, and you can lose a whole probe line very easily at Zerg as well. So you devote this mental energy to keep checking, keep checking, keep checking. Whereas the person that has the medevac, well, they don't really care, right? If they lose it or whatever, they've already written that thing off. And it's a really interesting way to kind of create a new dynamic in the game. And it's really cool to do those sort of things in StarCraft. And I think the great thing that we've come to the conclusion on, at least for this episode, is you should play the game you want to play.
Yeah.
There's no right or wrong way to play StarCraft. And you can take these, statements by Sun Tzu and apply them to your style of game,
Right.
and they will work.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. There is all of what we've talked about, and I highly, highly recommend, again, if anyone's not read it. I read this in like high school was the
Mm.
first time I read it. Before I played before I played StarCraft, before I really even played I'd never really played competitive games until I
Mhm.
played StarCraft 2. I wasn't interested in it as much, but it was so, like, the amount of things that you can just apply this book to is crazy.
Yeah.
If there's any edge of competition, or even just in some ways understanding the way that other people think about things as well. So
Mhm.
I highly, highly, highly recommend reading this book, checking it out, because it's such a fast read too. It's not
Yeah.
going to take you any time at all, but you will be you could think about it for ever if you want to.
Mhm. Well, I can't close it out better than that. I did have a couple things. Thanks again to Lord Cranial for picking up the nice questions and comments people have had along the way. It's too tough for us to try to like hold these galaxy brain ideas and look at Twitch chat sometimes. So we've got him, on deck scooping up the goodies. So I wanted to do a couple quick hits here before we close out. So, first one from Kin in chat, basically saying, knowing when to fight takes a lot of tiny pieces of various knowledge, right? And this is an interesting one. So, some context on her. She is Silver League Protoss, kind of, you know, seriously looking at improving in the game, and she's very mindful about that and willing to kind of go outside of her comfort zone and stuff. But then also, it's a very daunting task, right? It's you're watching streamers that are Diamond Masters GM, and you're seeing the gap between what they could do and what you can do. You're just, holy crap, how do I do it, right? Um, and she also kind of mentions, like, sometimes she'll see me say, "Oh, we didn't want to take that fight," and it's like, well, why? Like, this, how do I even approach that learning curve, right? What do you guys think about this idea of like that gap of figuring out that knowledge?
Um, Honestly, the best way to learn it is to just keep trying.
Hmm.
Like, just experience, and there are some things you could tell people, sure.
Hmm.
But like, you won't build that reflex into your brain until you actually have, I've lost against this 50 times, right?
Hmm.
I know now how many roaches I need to hold this many adepts, or I know now how many lings I need to hold a 2-on-1 timing. But you will never, like, I could tell you, yeah, you need 32 lings and you need 8 roaches for that adept timing. But you're not going to really understand that. You're not going to really get that until you lose to that adept timing
Mm.
over and over, and you try. Okay, what if I put the roach horn down now? What if I make lings now, right? You can definitely take shortcuts, and that's learning from other people's
Hmm.
losses or mistakes or things like that, and try to bridge that gap faster. But I think it's Bruce Lee that said the master has failed more times than the apprentice has even tried,
Mm,
which is one of my favorite quotes of all time because it really just shows you need to lose at the game in order to get better at it. You're not just going to
right.
be good to go. You just lose. You just lose to it. And then you look at it and you try to go, "Well, I should have done this instead, or I needed to watch for this, or I needed to make units now. And this was my indicator to do that."
Hmm.
And that I think is like the best way and approach to learning anything in the game is to, instead of hitting quit at the end, is to hit rewind and look at every one of the games you lost.
Right.
It's a bit of tacit knowledge as well.
Yeah.
These sort of things are hard to describe and hard to say. It's like, well, and this happens with a lot of streamers. I think when their viewers will come in with a replay and say, "Hey, how do I beat this?" Right, and then they look at the replay and say, "Well, okay, so your factory was late. You didn't get your add-on on time. Your third command didn't come down on time. You actually missed some production here. Then when you pushed out, you grouped up all your Marines. You didn't scan ahead. You walked on creep, and that's how you lost the game." And that game is so unique. It's probably never going to happen like that again.
Right.
So yeah, you have an answer, but what good is it? And like Apoptosis is saying, losing a bunch of times in similar situations sort of builds up a repertoire of what you know and don't know. And I would say to anybody who is learning the game like this, go back and listen to our episode about our first episode, right? The inner game of tennis.
Mm,
And read that book if you have a chance, or listen to the audiobook if you have a chance, because there's a lot of information in there about not being too hard on yourself. And I
mm,
think that's
Oh
something
yeah.
we do as StarCraft players, is really beat ourselves up for, oh, I should have known I needed Marauders at that time.
right.
Oh, I'm such a bad player. And then that makes it harder for you to learn, because now you have this blockage of, well, I'm bad, I can't do it, blah, blah, blah. But really, you do need to build up the repertoire and look at each loss as a possible learning opportunity, getting out of the way of yourself and letting it flow naturally. Essentially, what you're doing is learning to ride a bike. And you say, well, how do I ride a bike? Well, you got to get on a bike and try and kind of fall over a few times.
Yeah.
That's
Mhm.
essentially what we're all doing when we learn this game.
Hmm. Very cool.
No,
All right.
that's absolutely.
Yeah. So final one for the Q&A, because I know we're way over time here. So our very own, my young lord Cranial, says, for calculating and balancing chances, is this something that comes? Oh, this dovetails great into our tacit knowledge discussion. Is this something that comes with games, or is this something that can be focused on and actively practiced? Can I like hyper grind this skill, or do I just have to kind of like build it up?
That's hard. I think it's all you can do kind of both. Like there is a I think there is an understanding of um knowing if you can win the fight. There's obviously a mathematical, there's a logical formula that could be applied to that and that you could focus on and understand. But at the same time, that to build it into instinct or like a knee-jerk reaction, I think
Hmm.
does come from grinding, kind of grinding games and losing to that stuff or winning versus that stuff. I would personally say you can do both. You have to do both. You can't just do one way or the other.
Hmm.
Thing that I think you could focus on that would really help in that situation is understanding unit composition. Like, how does your unit composition do against their unit composition? Are they completely, is it like 10 immortals versus 30 roaches? Well, you lose that
Hmm.
every single time, right? Mathematically, you can just that in your head.
Hmm.
So usually unit compositions will include a diverse range so that you have an account for this or that. But one thing that I think does really, really well with hyper focus, again, in mirror matchups, is upgrades. If you
Mm.
can, like, focusing on upgrades is really, really good for calculating your chances and balancing your chances and tipping it in your favor. If you have more upgrades than they do, or you have them faster than they do, that can easily take your force from being not so good and making it much, 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 much better than your
Hmm.
opponents. So that is, I'd say, um, for the focus, I would almost say focus on like things like upgrade timing and clicking on your opponent's units, because you can do that, right? You can click
Right.
on their marine and you can see, oh, they have 2/2 or something like that,
Hmm.
and that will help you calculate those odds a bit better.
Yeah, I like that. I think it's such a broad, and when we discussed these points, right, we went very broad with it in terms of the different things it could even mean. So it's almost difficult to answer the question as he posed it, because it's like, well, okay,
Yeah.
which of these 20 skills baked into these couple of terms, right, are the ones that we're trying to hyper grind? So I like that you broke it down.
I would add to that too, and this is just because I've kind of been watching more Hearthstone lately. If you have somebody that's willing to work with you, either a coach or a player that's better than you, or a friend that's equal in skill to do a certain build, do that build, figure out what your response is, right?
Hmm.
And then I would say what's really important is to not grind out 100 of those games all in a row. Do a couple of them and then come back after 3, 4, 5 days and try and remember what the response is. Because it's this recall, we've talked about it in other
Yeah.
episodes about being able to recall the correct response, being able to recall what you need to do in certain situations. The best way to ingrain that into you is to interleave it, to give some time. So do it a little bit.
Mm.
Don't overgrind. Don't get so frustrated, like, oh, I'm never going to get it, or I'm going to do this a million times. Do enough of it. Figure out what you need to do. Figure out if it's upgrades. Figure out if it's building units. Figure out what production you need. Whatever it is you need to do to win the game. What you made a mistake, win the game. Then leave it. Come back to it. And if you have a practice partner or a coach, that's a great way to do as an hour long. We're going to knock this out. And you see this kind of being done. Like I said, I've been watching Hearthstone. You see this in some of his YouTube videos where he'll come up to something he wants to play around with or doesn't know how to deal with and figures out how to beat it. And then there you go.
Hmm. Very cool. Well, I think that is a nice way to close out. I think, Apoptosis, you summarized the book wonderfully. It's nice to end with a couple of comments from chat, especially as we don't get to interact as much, while we're doing this. So everybody, please, check out our guest Apoptosis. His socials are in chat. Go follow him. All of these wonderful places. If you are interested to support Archives Book Club, you can do that a handful of ways. Actually, just listening. And if you feel inclined to leave a review, good reviews help us kind of get our name out there. If you are inclined to support financially, like paying our guests is a thing that we've always wished we were set up to do. Currently, we don't. Apop is doing this out of the goodness of his heart right now. I would love to feed him some goblin coinage.
Wait, what? I'm doing this
Yeah.
for free? I'm out of here, dude.
It's community service, right?
Turns
Yeah.
the stream off instantly.
Yeah.
And of course, thank you to Lord Cranial for handling all of the moderation and scooping up some goodies out of chat. Thank you, Adraseth, for going along on this journey with me. And yeah, I guess I'll drop a raid here in chat. And also thank you to Warrior Bahamut for the raid there at the tail end. I see you. I appreciate you. Try not to interrupt these guys too much as they're kind of laying down some knowledge for us, but did want to thank you for that. Everybody, please go make it rain emotes on Pig. There's a lot of them over there, only a few of us, but we can make our presence felt, sure enough. And thank you once again, Apoptosis. It's been a pleasure to have you on. Look forward to part 2, people.
Yes. Absolutely, man. Well, thank you guys so much. It was really wonderful hanging out, talking about such a stellar book with you guys. I'm super stoked for part 2.
Me
Thank
too.
you.
Right, dropping the raid now.
Make sure to save your Audacity. So you're going to go File, Export as Wave.